The night was alive with colors. Neon signs flickering over rain-slicked streets, painting the city in red, blue, and gold. Lila moved through the crowded alleyways, balancing a tray full of drinks in one hand and a notebook in the other. Her tavern job was exhausting, but it gave her independence, and she liked to think of herself as someone who could handle anything. The bell above the tavern door jingled as she stepped out for a breath of air. The cold night made her pull her coat tighter, but something in the air felt heavier tonight, like the city itself was holding its breath. She glanced over her shoulder, shaking off the feeling. Probably just her imagination, she thought. Then she saw him, Darren, her ex-boyfriend. His eyes were dark with anger and his jaw was tight. He leaned against the brick wall near the tavern entrance, watching her like a predator. Lila froze, her stomach twisting. She hadn't seen him in months. He had left her life abruptly, leaving a trail of anger and broken words behind, and now here he was, standing like he owned the night. "Lila," he said, his voice low and rough. "We need to talk." She shook her head, stepping back. "Darren, I don't want to talk. Leave me alone." But he moved forward, closing the small space between them in a single step. His hand reached for hers, and her instincts screamed at her to run. She tried to step around him, but he grabbed her arm. "No," he said sharply. "You're coming with me." Fear raced through her veins. She struggled, twisting her body to break free, but he was strong, and anger made him dangerous. Just as she felt his grip tighten, something changed in the air. The cold hit her first. It wasn't just the night air. It was something colder, darker, ancient. Her breath formed small clouds in front of her. Though the night wasn't that cold, shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally along the walls, flickering with movement that didn't belong to any living thing. And then she felt the eyes. Watching. Waiting. From across the alley, a figure leaned in the darkness, eyes glowing faintly red, observing every motion. Lila didn't recognize him at first. He was impossibly tall, his presence heavy and commanding, yet silent. His hair was dark as midnight and his skin pale, almost glowing under the streetlights. His gaze locked on her, and it felt like he could see every thought in her mind. Darren grunted, pulling her toward the narrow bathroom door of the tavern. "Stop struggling. You're making this worse," he hissed. But before he could force her inside, the air seemed to shift violently. A sharp wind cut through the alley, pushing him back without anyone touching him. Darren stumbled, surprised, and Lila took the moment to slip free. She gasped for breath, looking toward the shadowed figure. The man, or something, moved closer, not in a rush, but with a terrifying control. Lila's heart pounded. He didn't speak, yet his presence told her he was a protector. A predator and a mystery all at once. Darren's anger twisted into confusion and fear. "You... what?" Darren stammered, stepping back. But before he could react further, the figure moved faster than Lila could follow, closing the distance in a blink. He stood between her and Darren, tall and unyielding. Darren's eyes widened, and a strange, low sound left his throat, half fear, half disbelief. "Stay away from her," the figure said. His voice was deep, calm, yet carried an unshakable authority. It was not loud, but every word pressed against Darren's chest like a weight. Darren hesitated, then tried to push forward. In response, the figure's shadow stretched unnaturally, wrapping around Darren like a living cloak. Darren tripped, falling backward onto the wet pavement. He scrambled to get up, but the figure was already gone. Lila turned toward the street. The stranger had vanished, leaving only a sense of cold power lingering in the air. Lila's knees shook, and she pressed a hand to her chest. Who are you?" she whispered to the empty alley. The only reply was the faint echo of her own voice. She knew something had changed. She wasn't just saved, she was noticed. And that realization both thrilled and terrified her. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. Every noise seemed louder, every shadow deeper, and every movement in the corner of her eye seemed alive. Lila kept glancing over her shoulder, but there was no one. Yet the feeling persisted, like something or someone was following, watching, waiting. Finally, she locked up the tavern and stepped into the quiet streets. Rain had begun to fall lightly, dotting her coat with tiny sparkling drops. The city seemed different now, darker, older, alive with secrets she had never imagined. She hugged her coat tighter and started walking toward her small apartment, trying to calm the flutter of panic and curiosity inside her. But then she felt it again. The watching. Her eyes darted to a shadow atop the nearby building. For a moment she thought she imagined it. Then a figure moved, as if gliding silently across the rooftop. She blinked and the figure was gone. Her mind raced. Was she going crazy? Or was this the man who had saved her? She didn't know, and she was afraid she would never get answers. That night, sleep was impossible. Lila tossed and turned in her small, cramped apartment, listening to the rain tapping against the window. She thought about Darren, about the strange man, about the cold and the shadows, something about the way he had moved, the way he had stopped Darren without touching him. It wasn't human. She sat up in bed, wrapping her knees to her chest. The memory of his eyes, the red glow in the darkness, haunted her. Part of her wanted to run, to leave the city entirely, but another part felt a strange pull toward him. She had felt safe in his presence, even though she had no idea who he was, and yet a dangerous thrill ran through her veins at the thought of seeing him again. Outside, the night continued, indifferent and eternal. Shadows stretched across rooftops, whispers of wind curling through the alleys, and somewhere in the city, the tall figure watched. His gaze never left her, even though she couldn't see him. He felt her fear, her strength, her courage. He felt her heart, stubborn and fierce, and it drew him in like a flame in the dark. Lila did not know it, but her life had changed in one violent moment in the alley. She had glimpsed something ancient, something powerful, something dangerous, and yet she had also seen protection, a promise that her life could be different from the fear that had haunted her. And in the quiet of the night, the Vampire King watched, patient and unreadable, waiting for the right moment to step out of the shadows and into her life. Lila fell into restless sleep, but even in her dreams the figure lingered. She dreamed of red eyes in the darkness, of a cold wind that carried both danger and safety, of a hand reaching for hers and a voice that promised both terror and protection. She woke with her heart racing, knowing that the city she had always known was only a thin veil over something far older and far darker than she had ever imagined. When morning came, it brought no comfort. The sun rose weakly behind a blanket of clouds, and Lila stared out her window at the city streets below. The tavern door, the alley, the rain, they all felt like a memory from another life. And she knew that she would never be the same, because somewhere above, somewhere unseen, the Vampire King was waiting, and he would not be ignored. The city never truly slept. Even in the early hours, neon lights hummed, casting colors across the rain-slicked streets. Lila walked carefully, her coat pulled tight around her as she headed to the corner cafe for breakfast. But even in the brightness of morning, she could not shake the feeling of eyes on her. It had been 3 days since Darren had tried to drag her into the tavern bathroom. She had told herself she was imagining things when shadows flickered in the corners of her vision, or when she felt a strange chill in the air, but deep down she knew it was real. Someone, or something, was watching her. Lila tried to focus on mundane tasks, on the small routines of her life. She filled water glasses at the cafe, smiled politely at customers, and avoided any lingering thoughts about the alley or the strange figure she had seen. Still, at night, the memory of red eyes glowing in the darkness haunted her, and she could feel a pull she did not understand. That evening, she returned to her apartment exhausted. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets shiny and reflective under the neon lights. Her apartment was small and simple, barely more than a bedroom with a tiny kitchen. She dropped her coat on the chair and sighed, thinking of the events that had changed her life forever. Then she noticed something on her door. A folded envelope, dark and elegant, lay against the wood. The paper was thick and smooth, and the ink glimmered faintly under the lamplight. Lila's heart skipped a beat as she bent down to pick it up. The handwriting was strange, almost flowing like smoke. She carefully opened the envelope. Inside, a single sheet of black paper held a message. "Meet me tonight. The shadows will guide you." No address, no explanation, just the initials. Her first instinct was to throw it away, to tell herself it was a prank or someone's cruel idea. But part of her was curious, terribly curious. The figure from the alley, the one who had saved her, had left an impression she could not ignore. She debated all evening. Every logical thought warned her not to go. A stranger claiming to want to meet her? It was dangerous, even foolish. Yet something in her chest pulled her toward the city streets again, toward the unknown. Night fell. Lila wrapped herself in her coat, hiding her trembling hands in her pockets, and stepped into the quiet streets. The rain had returned in a soft drizzle, making the neon lights shimmer even more beautifully. Her eyes darted to every shadow, every flicker of movement, but she saw nothing. At least nothing clearly human. Then she felt it again. That watching presence. It was subtle, not close, but undeniably there. Her pulse quickened. She stopped in the middle of the street, trying to catch her breath, and whispered, "Who are you?" A soft wind stirred, and for a brief moment she saw a tall figure gliding across the rooftop of the building opposite her. His movement was silent, almost unnatural. She blinked, and he was gone, leaving only the darkness behind. She pressed on, following a sense she could not name, letting the pull guide her deeper into the city's shadows. Narrow alleyways, abandoned courtyards, and empty streets led her finally to an ancient-looking bridge. The stone beneath her feet was worn smooth, and a faint mist curled along the edges. There, at the center of the bridge, he waited. Cale, the Vampire King. Even in the faint light of the moon, he was impossible to ignore. Tall and regal, his dark hair falling over his shoulders, his red eyes gleaming in the night. He stood like a statue carved from darkness itself. His presence made her knees weak, yet she felt no immediate fear. Instead, there was a strange pull, a strange sense of safety in the midst of danger. "You came," he said softly, his voice carrying like a melody over the mist. I don't know why I am here," Lila admitted, her voice trembling. "I received your note, but you are here because you are meant to be," Cale interrupted gently, stepping closer. His movements were smooth, precise, commanding. "You are stronger than you know, Lila. Stronger than those who seek to harm you can understand." She swallowed hard, studying him. The air around him seemed colder than the night should allow, and shadows bent toward him as if drawn by his presence. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, suspicion and curiosity mixing in her chest. Cale's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly. "Because you are not just anyone," he said. "And because there are forces in this city that would see you disappear. Darren, he is no longer entirely himself. He serves something older, darker, something he cannot control." Her stomach churned. "What do you mean?" "Some people," Cale explained, "are touched by darkness. It starts small, a whisper, a fear, a desire, but it grows until it controls them. Darren has been marked. He does not know it yet, but it is only a matter of time before the darkness overwhelms him." Lila's heart beat faster. "And you can stop it?" He looked at her intently, his red eyes glowing in the mist. "I can protect you, but it will not be easy. You will have to trust me even when you fear what I am." She wanted to run, to escape back to the safety of her small apartment, but something in his gaze held her in place. She saw no malice, only power and a strange kind of care. Her curiosity and fear battled inside her, twisting and turning until she could barely breathe. "I don't know if I can trust anyone," she whispered. Cale stepped closer, his presence pressing against her like a shield. "Trust is not given lightly," he said, his voice softer now, almost a whisper that brushed against her mind. "It is earned, and I will earn it. But first, you must decide to step into the shadows with me. Only then will you understand the truth of this world." The mist swirled around them, curling like living tendrils. Lila could see shapes moving in the darkness, forms that were not quite human, not quite shadows. Her pulse raced, and yet she did not step back. The pull toward him, toward this strange, dangerous world, was stronger than her fear. I want to understand," she said finally, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I want to know what is happening." Cale inclined his head, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Then follow me," he said. He turned, moving with a grace that seemed to defy gravity, gliding along the bridge toward a narrow street that led to the heart of the city. Lila followed, her steps careful but determined. The streets grew darker, older as they walked. Buildings loomed above, their facades cracked and weathered by centuries. The air smelled of earth, stone, and something faintly metallic, like iron. Lila felt as if she had stepped into another world, one that existed beneath the ordinary city she had always known. Finally, Cale stopped before an old gate. Wrought iron twisted into strange, almost impossible shapes. Beyond it, a massive structure rose, black against the night sky. An ancient castle perched on a hill, its towers reaching toward the clouds. Lila's breath caught in her throat. This is where you live?" she whispered. Cale's eyes met hers. "This is where I exist," he corrected softly. "And this is where you will be safe from Darren." from the darkness that hunts you, and from yourself, if you let fear guide you. The gates opened silently at his command, revealing a courtyard lit by faint glowing lanterns. The air was cool, scented with flowers that bloomed only at night. Shadows danced across the walls as if alive, and distant sounds echoed, a mix of wind, water, and whispers. Lila felt a shiver run down her spine, part awe, part fear. Inside, the castle was even more breathtaking. Towering ceilings, spiral staircases, and halls lined with books that seemed older than the city itself. Statues of figures she could not name watched silently as she walked, and every shadow seemed to bend slightly toward Kale, acknowledging his presence. "You are safe here," Kale said, his voice firm, "but safety is not the same as understanding. You must be ready to learn, to see what lies beyond the ordinary world." Lila nodded, her heart still racing. She had never imagined a night like this, never imagined meeting someone like him. And yet, despite the fear, she felt a spark of something she could not name, excitement, curiosity, and a strange, unspoken connection. Kale's eyes softened for a brief moment, and Lila felt as if he could see every thought in her mind. "Rest now," he said quietly. "Tomorrow your journey begins." But even as she settled into the guest room, a part of her remained alert, senses sharpened. The shadows seemed to whisper, and somewhere deep within the castle a presence stirred, watching them both. She did not know if it was friend or foe, but she knew one thing. Her life had changed forever, and the night had only just begun. The morning light that reached the castle was pale and silver, filtered through tall, narrow windows. Lila awoke slowly, the events of the past night still pressing on her mind. The castle was quiet, but unlike any quiet she had known in the city. Here, silence was alive. Soft whispers in the corners, faint echoes along the high ceilings, and the subtle hum of shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. Kyle did not appear immediately. She sat on the edge of the bed staring at the high ceiling, the tapestries that hung like ancient rivers frozen in time. Each one told stories she could not read, histories she could not name. Yet she felt their weight, their presence, as if the walls themselves had memories they had kept for centuries. Finally, a voice broke the stillness. "You are awake." Kyle stood in the doorway, his red eyes faintly glowing even in the morning light. He was as tall and commanding as she remembered, his presence filling the room without effort. His gaze held her still like a current she could not resist. "Good morning," Lila said, trying to sound braver than she felt. I didn't sleep much." Kale's expression softened, though he remained imposing.
"Sleep comes in time."
"You are not accustomed to this place, nor to the currents that move within it." He stepped closer, the sound of his boots quiet on the polished stone floor. "Come with me. Today, you will begin to understand why you were brought here." Lila rose, her heart quickening. She followed him through winding corridors and grand halls, each filled with shadows that seemed to bow toward him. Statues of ancient figures lined the passageways, their faces carved with wisdom, sorrow, and authority. She realized that each corner of this castle carried history, knowledge, and power, secrets that had existed long before the city below had been built. They reached a vast chamber lined with bookshelves that rose higher than her eyes could follow. The air smelled of old paper, dust, and something faintly metallic like iron. Candles floated along the walls, their flames steady and golden, unaffected by any wind. A long table in the center was covered with scrolls, tomes, and artifacts she could not recognize. "This," Kale said, gesturing to the room, "is the Library of Night. It holds knowledge from centuries past, the histories of men, and the truths of those who walk in shadow." Lila's eyes widened as she looked around. "It's incredible." Kale's eyes softened. "Knowledge is power, understanding is protection, and you will need both if you are to survive what comes." Her curiosity mingled with fear. "What comes?" she asked quietly. Kale's gaze turned serious. "Darren is not who he once was. The darkness that touches him grows stronger each day. He has been marked by forces he does not understand, forces that feed on fear and anger. Soon he will no longer be able to choose between right and wrong." Lila felt a chill creep through her chest. "Marked? By what?" "By an ancient curse," Kale explained. "It has existed in the world long before men walked these streets. It is a hunger that feeds on weakness, on hesitation, on despair. And Darren, he has begun to feed it without realizing." She swallowed hard. So he's dangerous? Kale nodded. Very. And he is coming for you again. Soon. Her heart raced, fear and determination twisting together. Then why? Why don't you just stop him? Kale's expression darkened slightly. It is not so simple. Some forces cannot be destroyed. They can only be contained. I can protect you, guide you, teach you. But you must also learn to protect yourself. Courage alone is not enough. Lila looked around the room again, feeling the weight of the centuries of knowledge surrounding them. Teach me then, she said quietly. I want to learn. Kale's lips curved faintly, almost imperceptibly. Good. We begin now. He led her to a smaller chamber, one with mirrors lining the walls and strange symbols etched into the floor. Here, you will learn to feel the currents of the world, he explained. Not just the physical world, but the hidden one. The shadows, the whispers, the forces that flow beneath the surface of what you see. Lila stepped into the center, nerves twisting in her stomach. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted. You can, Kyle said firmly. Fear is natural, but courage. Courage is what separates those who survive from those who do not. Close your eyes, listen, feel. She obeyed, shutting her eyes and taking a deep breath. At first there was nothing, just the sound of her own heartbeat and the distant hum of the castle. But gradually, she felt something shifting around her, a current she could not see but could sense. Shadows moved differently, whispers brushed against her mind, and the air seemed to vibrate with quiet energy. Kale's voice guided her. Focus, let yourself be part of it. Do not fight the flow. Let it move through you. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. She could not tell. Time seemed different in the castle, bending and stretching with the currents of its magic. By the end, she could feel the presence of the shadows, the whispers of the night, the faint pulse of life in every corner. She realized that she had been part of something bigger, something older, and it terrified and thrilled her all at once. Kale watched her silently, studying her every movement. You have talent, he said finally, but talent alone is not enough. You must be brave. You must be willing to face Darren, and the darkness that controls him. Lila nodded, feeling both fear and determination. I will try, she said. Kale's gaze softened. That is enough for now. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is action despite it. The lesson ended, but Lila could not stop thinking about Darren. The memory of his anger, his grip, and the strange pull of the darkness around him made her skin crawl. She understood now that Kale had not exaggerated. Darren was no ordinary threat. Even as she sat quietly in the chamber, Kale's presence beside her, Lila felt another pull, this one from him. It was subtle, a tension in the air, a connection she could not name. She looked at him, and for a moment she saw not the vampire king, not the shadow of centuries, but something almost human. Something lonely, burdened, and powerful. You, she began, then stopped, unsure what she wanted to say. Kyle's eyes softened, and he nodded slightly. Yes, she shook her head, frustrated with herself. It's nothing. He did not push, but the faintest smile touched his lips. It is not nothing, he said softly. There is something between us, yes, but it is complicated and dangerous. You must not let it distract you. Lila's chest tightened. She knew he was right. Yet try as she might, she could not ignore the pull, the unspoken connection, the magnetic presence that drew her toward him even as fear surrounded them. Their lesson was interrupted suddenly by a faint noise. A whisper carried on the wind, a shadow that moved differently. Lila's heart leapt. Kale stiffened, his eyes glowing brighter. Darren, Kale said softly, almost in a growl. He is closer than we thought. Lila felt fear spike in her chest. What do we do? Kale took her hand gently, guiding her to the window overlooking the city. We prepare, he said. You have learned much today, but now the test begins. You must be ready to face him, and the darkness that controls him, and you must trust me as I trust you. Her pulse raced, fear and anticipation twisting together. She looked at him, at the commanding figure who had saved her, guided her, and now stood with her in the quiet chamber, preparing her for the unknown. I trust you, she said finally, her voice steady despite the fear inside. Kale's gaze softened again and he nodded. Good. Trust will be your greatest weapon. The wind picked up outside, swirling around the castle towers, carrying distant echoes from the city below. Shadows shifted, whispers rose, and somewhere deep in the alleyways of the city, Darren moved closer, unaware of the forces preparing to meet him. Lila stared out at the city lights, her heart pounding. She knew the danger was real, the darkness growing. But she also knew something else. She was no longer alone. And for the first time in a long time, she felt the spark of courage and hope that Cale had awakened within her. The night was far from over. And the castle, with its shadows, secrets, and the presence of the Vampire King, had only just begun to show her the depths of its power and the dangers that lurked in the city below. The night was alive with whispers. Rain had returned to the city streets, hitting the rooftops and creating soft echoes that carried far into the darkness. Inside the castle, shadows moved like living things, curling along the walls, bending with the currents of magic that Cale controlled. Lila stood at the edge of the grand hall, her chest tight with anticipation. Cale's presence was beside her, solid and commanding, yet tempered with a care that made her pulse quicken. She had learned much since arriving, how to sense currents of the hidden world, how to feel the movement of shadows, and how to listen to whispers carried on the wind. She was no longer just a frightened girl from the city. She was a student of the night, of power and of survival. But the night held danger. A distant sound carried through the castle, faint but unmistakable. The crunch of boots on wet stone, a presence approaching. Lila's heart clenched as she recognized it instantly. "Darren," she whispered. Cale's eyes glowed brighter, and his lips pressed into a thin line. "He is stronger than before. The curse has begun to control him. He will not stop, not until he reaches you." Fear and determination intertwined inside Lila. She had prepared for this moment, but nothing could truly prepare her for seeing him again. The man who had once controlled her world with anger and fear, and now something darker moved through him, twisting him into something unrecognizable. The grand hall doors slammed open, the force rattling the ancient wood. Darren stepped inside, eyes wild, mouth twisted with anger and fear. He did not see the castle as a place of history or power. He saw only Lila, his target. "You can't stop me," he shouted, rushing forward. But the shadows themselves seemed to rise against him, bending and twisting, holding him back as if the castle itself was alive. Cale moved swiftly, placing himself between Darren and Lila. His movements were precise, fluid, yet full of strength. "Stop, Darren," he commanded, his voice low and resonant. "You do not control this." Darren struggled against the invisible force holding him, but the curse within him pushed harder. I can't." "I won't," he muttered, his voice breaking as the darkness twisted his words. Lila's fear flared, but alongside it came courage. She stepped forward, focusing on the currents Cale had taught her to sense. Shadows responded to her presence, moving with her, flowing like water around her. She felt the strange energy within her. The spark Cale had awakened, and she realized she could help. "Darren," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling inside her. "You don't have to let it control you. Fight it." For a moment Darren froze, confusion flashing in his eyes. The curse twisted, recoiling slightly at her words, sensing resistance. Cale's gaze met hers, acknowledging her strength without a word. Together they formed a balance. Her courage, his power, the castle itself alive in defense. Darren's movement faltered, but the darkness within him was relentless. He lashed out and shadows twisted violently around him, striking at the walls, the floor, the very air. Lila felt the force of it, the pull trying to break her concentration. But she clung to Cale's teachings, letting the currents flow through her, steadying her mind, guiding her fear into control. Cale advanced, his presence like a shield of iron and shadow. With a swift motion, he struck the currents of the darkness, redirecting them, bending them away from Lila. But the curse lashed out at him, stronger than anything he had faced in years. A shadow struck his arm, sending a shock of pain through him. He gritted his teeth, his red eyes blazing. "Focus," he shouted to Lila. "You are part of this now." Lila's pulse surged. She stepped forward fully into the currents, letting her newfound strength flow into the shadows around them. Together they pressed against the darkness, bending it, holding it, refusing to let it consume Darren entirely. For a moment silence fell. The storm of shadows paused, Darren's wild movements slowing. His chest heaved, sweat and rain dripping from his hair, and his eyes, just for a moment, looked human again. Lila saw it, and a pang of hope pierced her fear. You can fight it, she said softly, taking a cautious step closer. You are stronger than the curse. You are still you. The darkness recoiled, as if sensing her resolve, as if the spark of light within her challenged its power. Darren stumbled, falling to his knees, and for a brief moment the curse seemed contained. But even as relief washed over her, she knew the danger was not gone. Cale approached Darren cautiously, placing a hand on his shoulder. It is not yet over, he said, his voice calm but firm. The curse feeds on fear, and it is clever. You must continue to fight, or it will return stronger. Darren's head hung low. He did not respond, trapped between the darkness inside him and the strength that Lila and Cale had pressed upon him. Lila felt a surge of pity, anger, and fear. The man who had once hurt her so deeply was now a victim of something far greater than either of them. Kyle turned to her, his expression unreadable but intense. You were brave, he said. You faced the darkness with me, and you held steady. That is not easy for anyone. Her heart fluttered at his words. I didn't do it alone, she said quietly. Her eyes met his, and for a fleeting second, the tension between them shifted from fear to something unspoken, something dangerous and magnetic. The castle remained quiet for a moment, the shadows settling, the currents still around them. Darren sat on the floor, exhausted and broken, and Lila realized the cost of the battle. Cale had been injured slightly, though he did not complain. The strength it took to contain Darren's curse had left him drained, and she could see the faint tension in his posture, the slight grimace he tried to hide. You are not invincible, she whispered, stepping closer, unable to stop herself from noticing the vulnerability beneath his imposing presence. Cale's gaze met hers, and for a moment the immortal power faded into something more human. No one is, he said softly. Not even me. Not even those who seem untouchable. That is why we protect what we care for. That is why courage matters. Lila's chest tightened. She realized with a mixture of fear and longing that she cared, not just for her own survival but for him. She cared for the vampire king who had saved her, taught her, and now fought beside her, and she understood in a quiet, unspoken way that the bond forming between them was more than chance. It was necessity, trust, and something deeper, something neither of them fully understood yet. Darren's breathing slowed, the shadows around him diminishing. He looked up at Lila and Cale, confusion and fear still in his eyes, but a faint spark of recognition returned. Lila felt a mix of pity and relief. The curse had not fully claimed him, but it was still alive, lurking in the corners of his mind. Cale stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Lila's shoulder. The night is not done, he said, his voice steady but serious. Darren will recover, and the darkness will return unless we act. You have strength, but there is still more you must learn, and there is more at stake than you realize. She nodded, her mind racing. She had faced shadows, fear, and danger tonight, yet she felt more alive than she ever had. And through it all, she could feel Cale's presence. Steady, commanding, and protective, pulling her into something she could not yet name. As the night deepened, the rain outside slowing to a whisper, Lila realized one thing clearly. The battle was far from over. Darren's curse had been challenged, but it had not been destroyed. And Cale, despite his power, carried burdens she did not yet understand. She looked at him, and for a moment, the immortal figure became human in her eyes, vulnerable, fierce, and magnetic. And in that moment she knew the connection between them was more than fate. It was necessity, trust, and the spark of something neither of them could ignore. The shadows moved quietly around them, whispers echoing through the grand hall. Somewhere in the depths of the city, the forces that had touched Darren stirred, sensing the challenge. The night was far from over, and the currents of danger, courage, and unspoken desire intertwined, drawing them all into a dance of shadows that would test their hearts, their strength, and the bond forming between them. Lila took a deep breath, feeling both fear and determination. She knew the next confrontation would come, stronger and more dangerous than before, but she was ready to face the darkness, ready to fight, and ready to stand beside Cale. No matter the cost, the night had tested them, but it had also revealed something unexpected, the beginnings of trust, courage, and a bond that could survive even the deepest shadows. And as the first hints of dawn touched the castle towers, Lila knew the true test was still ahead, and that together they would face whatever darkness came next. The castle was quiet, but the silence was heavy with tension. Lila stood at the edge of the courtyard, the moonlight illuminating her pale face. Kyle's presence was beside her, solid and protective, yet the subtle tension in his shoulders betrayed the weight he carried. Tonight was the night, the moment they had been preparing for. Darren, consumed by the darkness of the curse, was coming to finish what he had begun, and Lila knew that their strength, courage, and trust in each other would be tested beyond anything they had faced before. "Are you ready?" Kyle asked, his voice low and steady. His red eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, shadows curling around him like living things. Lila nodded. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with determination. "I am. Whatever happens, I won't run." Kale's lips curved into a faint, approving smile. "Good. Courage is your greatest weapon." The wind stirred, carrying a faint, whispering sound. Lila tensed, and Kale's hand brushed hers for a brief moment. A simple touch, yet it carried warmth, strength, and reassurance. It reminded her that she was not alone. Then from the shadows Darren emerged. His eyes glowed with a red haze, the curse twisting his face into something fierce and unnatural. Shadows moved around him like living snakes, curling and striking at the air as if drawn to his anger and fear. "You cannot stop me," he growled, stepping closer. His voice carried desperation and darkness in equal measure. Kale stepped forward, placing himself directly between Lila and Darren. "You do not control this," Kale said firmly. "You are stronger than the curse, if only you choose to be." Darren lashed out, a wave of dark energy sweeping toward them. Lila felt the force push against her, threatening to knock her off her feet. She steadied herself, summoning the currents Kale had taught her to sense. Shadows responded to her, bending and twisting under her control, forming a protective barrier between her and the dark force. Kale's eyes met hers, silently guiding her, and she realized in that moment that they were no longer teacher and student. They were partners, bound by trust, courage, and a connection deeper than either had admitted. Darren roared, frustration and fury twisting into the curse, and he lunged forward. Kale met him with strength and precision, redirecting the energy that burst from Darren. Lila added her own power, guiding the shadows around her to push back the darkness, forming a protective ring around them both. "You can fight it, Darren!" Lila shouted, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "You are not the curse, you are still yourself." For a brief moment Darren faltered, confusion flickering in his eyes. The darkness wavered as if uncertain how to respond to her words. Kale pressed his advantage, controlling the currents of shadow with precision, bending the energy away from them and toward containment. But the curse was clever. It lashed back, striking at Kyle with a force that even he struggled to contain. Lila felt the shockwave, the pull of the darkness, and she almost faltered. But Kyle's hand on her arm steadied her. "You are stronger than you know," he said quietly, his voice steady even as the shadows twisted violently around them. "Do not let fear control you." Lila closed her eyes, drawing on the lessons of the past nights. She let the currents flow through her, guiding the shadows with her intent, with her courage. She reached out, not just with power but with hope, with belief that Darren could still be free. And for a moment, it worked. The shadows around Darren recoiled, the curse writhing as if resisting an invisible hand. His chest heaved, his face twisted with confusion and relief, and he fell to his knees. The darkness tried to lash out one final time, but Lila and Kale pressed together, forming a shield of courage, trust, and controlled power. Kale moved closer to Darren, his voice low and firm. "It is over if you choose it. Let go of the darkness. Fight it, or it will consume you entirely." Darren's breathing slowed, the red haze in his eyes fading slightly. For the first time that night, he looked human, vulnerable, and uncertain. Lila felt a pang of pity and relief, understanding that the man who had once tried to control her was now a victim of forces far beyond his comprehension. Kale's gaze returned to Lila, softening. "You did well," he said quietly. "Without your courage, he might have broken free entirely. You held steady when it mattered most." Her chest tightened, both from exhaustion and the unspoken connection between them. I couldn't have done it without you, she admitted softly. Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment, the world felt suspended between them, the shadows, the castle, and the night itself holding its breath. Kale took a slow step closer, his expression unreadable yet intense. You are stronger than you realize, Lila, and braver than many who have walked these halls. She felt her heart quicken, the bond between them undeniable. I feel like I've changed, she said. I'm not the same girl who walked into this city a few nights ago. No, Kyle said softly, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. You are far beyond that now. You've seen darkness, faced fear, and stood beside me. And you've survived. The wind stirred, carrying faint whispers through the courtyard. Darren rose slowly, shaking off the last remnants of the curse. He looked at them both, a mix of fear, gratitude, and awe in his eyes. I don't understand, he said quietly. I felt it. Something inside me fighting. I could feel her and him helping me. Lila stepped forward cautiously, holding out a hand. It's over now, Darren. The curse can't control you if you fight it. You have a choice. Darren hesitated, then nodded, understanding dawning on him. He took a deep breath, and the last tendrils of darkness seemed to dissolve into the night air. The courtyard fell silent, save for the soft drip of rain and the gentle hum of the castle itself. Kale turned to Lila, his expression softer than it had ever been. You've done more than survive, he said quietly. You've changed the course of events, and you've shown me something rare. Courage, hope, and something I did not expect. Her breath caught. What is that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kale took a slow step closer, the shadows bending around him like a cloak. A connection, he admitted. A bond forged not just in danger, but in trust, in shared courage, in the willingness to face fear together. Something I do not often allow myself to feel. Lila felt her chest tighten, warmth spreading through her as she realized the truth in his words. I feel it too, she whispered. For a long moment, they simply stood there. The shadows, swirling softly around them, the rain falling lightly and the night holding its breath. In that silence, everything unspoken was understood, the trust, the courage, the connection that had grown between them in the darkness. Kyle reached out slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, a rare softness in a man of immense power. Whatever comes next, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, we face it together. Lila nodded, her heart pounding. Together, she echoed. The castle seemed to exhale, the shadows calming, the currents settling into quiet harmony. Even Darren, now free from the curse, watched with a mixture of awe and gratitude. He understood in some small way that what had transpired was more than a battle. It was a transformation, not just of the night, but of hearts and courage. Kale turned, leading Lila back toward the inner halls of the castle. The storm outside had softened, leaving a gentle drizzle, and the first hints of dawn touched the towers with pale gold. Lila felt a strange peace, a balance between fear and hope, darkness and light, danger and trust. You've changed me, Kyle said quietly as they walked, in ways I did not expect. And I will protect you. Not just because it is my duty, but because I choose to. Lila looked at him, her chest tightening with emotion. And I choose you, she said softly, her words carrying the weight of courage, trust, and something deeper, something unspoken yet undeniable. Kale's eyes glimmered, and for a fleeting moment the immortal figure seemed entirely human, vulnerable, powerful, and utterly present. He reached for her hand, holding it gently, yet with a strength that reminded her of the battles they had faced together. The city below began to wake, unaware of the events that had transpired in the shadows above. But within the castle, the currents of magic, courage, and love had shifted forever. Lila knew the road ahead would not always be easy, that dangers still lingered in the night and that darkness would always exist. But she also knew one thing with certainty: she would never face it alone, and Kale, the Vampire King, would never let her. The castle stood silent as the sun's first rays touched its towers. Shadows and whispers softened, flowing around them like a gentle tide. The night had tested them, forged them, and revealed what mattered most. Not power alone, but trust, courage, and a bond that could survive even the deepest darkness. Together, they stepped forward, into the dawn, into a world that now seemed both familiar and transformed. The heart of shadows had been faced, darkness had been challenged, and a bond had been forged that neither time nor curse could break. The night had ended, and a new chapter, filled with trust, courage, and the quiet promise of love, had begun.